Well, everybody, welcome back. Today is March 4th, 2025, and man, oh man, do we have a lot to unpack in today's news. You guys ready for a deep dive into some of the big stories grabbing the headlines right now?
It's a wild world out there for sure. Seems like everything is changing so fast.
Right. It can be hard to even keep up sometimes. Let's start with something that's been generating a lot of buzz. President Trump's joint address to Congress, his first since stepping back onto the political stage. I mean, talk about anticipation, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. A joint address to Congress is always a big deal, but this one, with all the political baggage, it's huge. And of course, Senator Alyssa Slotkin delivered the Democratic response, which has really got people talking.
Yeah, the choice of Slotkin for the response, that seemed pretty strategic.
You're right on the money there. It's definitely strategic. Slotkin is seen as a centrist, someone who can appeal to a lot more people than some of the other big names in the Democratic Party. And her background in national security, she worked with both Presidents Bush and Obama on that. So she's got some serious street cred, especially in this day and age.
Her resume is pretty impressive, yeah.
Yeah.
CIA analyst, she served in Iraq and was involved with national security under both Democrats and Republicans. That says a lot. So with her background and, where she stands in the party, what do you think she'll focus on in this response?
Well, it'll be interesting to see how she positions herself and the Democratic Party going forward. She's all about reaching a wide audience, so my guess is she'll highlight those issues that resonate with most Americans, stuff like economic security, national security, and the challenges that families are facing every day.
That makes sense. Those are issues that hit home for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
And it makes you think, it's like, what does all of this mean for the future of the Democrats? Are they changing their game plan, or is this just a one-off tactic for this event? What do you think?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Slotkin's response might give us a hint about where they're headed. We'll see if she suggests any big changes in their approach.
Definitely something to keep an eye on. Okay, let's switch gears now and talk about the news coming out of the FBI. We're hearing the head of the New York field office was forced out after he criticized President Trump publicly. And this isn't the first time there's been friction between Trump and the FBI, is it?
You're right, there's definitely a history there. And this whole thing, it's raising a lot of eyebrows because it looks like there's some real tension brewing between the administration and the agency.
Okay, so for those who might not be completely up to date, can you give us a little background on this, this ongoing tension?
Well, President Trump has made it pretty clear that he's looking to shake things up, change the leadership in some of these important agencies, and the FBI is definitely on that list. This has ruffled some feathers, especially among the officials who are really worried about the FBI's independence. They're saying that all this political interference is making it harder for them to do their jobs.
I can see their point. The FBI has always been known for being impartial, for staying out of politics. That's been super important for them to operate, with some degree of autonomy. But what's really interesting here is how this whole situation might change how people see the FBI, both inside the agency and among the public.
You've hit the nail on the head there. The FBI needs the public's trust to do what they do. If people start doubting their motives or their integrity, it could seriously hurt their investigations and make it way harder to enforce the law. Think about it. If people don't trust the FBI to be fair, they might not be so willing to help with investigations or even report crimes in the first place.
And don't forget about the agents themselves. Being stuck in the middle of all this political drama can't be easy. It makes you wonder, if all these experienced agents start leaving because of these tensions, what's that going to mean for the future of the FBI?
Yeah, that's a big question. A strong, independent FBI is crucial for a democracy to function. And all these ongoing tensions, well, they're definitely something we need to keep watching closely.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to our third big story for today, immigration. President Trump is really ramping up immigration enforcement, and it's creating a lot of controversy. What can you tell us about this plan, the specifics?
Oh boy, this plan is a big one. We're talking multiple agencies here, including state and local law enforcement, even potentially bringing in military resources. And it's all focused on deporting people who are here illegally. The administration is pulling out all the stops on this one.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. But it makes you wonder, do they actually have what it takes to pull this off? This is a massive operation. It seems like it could easily run into logistical problems. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a valid concern. The plan is asking for a big increase in ICE's budget and their detention capacity. But even with that, there are some serious doubts about whether they can do this effectively and, in a humane way.
The human rights side of this is a big worry. This kind of large-scale deportation effort could really hurt communities and families, especially in areas with large numbers of undocumented people. The thought of families being torn apart is just heartbreaking.
You're absolutely right. And we're already seeing the effects. There's this fear, this anxiety that you can just feel in these communities. And this kind of policy just makes it worse. It creates this climate of fear and distrust that can be really damaging.
And we can't forget that this isn't happening in a vacuum. It's part of a bigger trend, a tightening of immigration policies under the Trump administration. It makes us ask ourselves, what kind of country do we want to be? How do we want to treat people who are just looking for a better life here? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is a really complicated issue. There aren't any easy answers, are there? I mean, you got to think about security, but also about being humane, and finding that balance. That's tricky.
You're right, it is. And you know what's interesting? All three of these stories we've been talking about today, the joint address, the FBI shakeup, and this expansion of immigration enforcement, they all seem connected in a way. Do you see a common thread running through all this?
Oh, yeah, definitely. If you step back and look at the bigger picture, there's a theme that emerges, a theme of power and control, and this ongoing struggle between security and individual rights.
That's fascinating. Could you unpack that a bit more? What do you mean by power and control exactly?
Well, what we're seeing is a president who's not afraid to use his executive power. He's shaking things up in the agencies, pushing his agenda, and basically challenging anyone who questions his authority. And that has implications for the rule of law, the balance of power, even the norms that have always shaped our political system.
And how does that connect to this tension between security and individual rights?
Well, sometimes, in the name of security, you see policies that could step on civil liberties or target certain groups. That raises concerns about due process, about equal protection under the law, even the basic fabric of our democracy. We have to be really careful about finding the right balance between keeping our nation safe and protecting the rights of individuals.
Yeah, it feels like we're at a turning point in our history. The choices we make in the next few months, the next few years, they're going to have a huge impact on the future of our country. And that's why it's so important for people to stay informed, have those difficult conversations, and hold their elected officials accountable. These aren't just political debates. They have real consequences for all of us. Wouldn't you agree?
Totally. It's more important than ever for people to be active, engaged citizens. We can't just sit back and let this stuff happen.
That's a great point.
No.
Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the media. All this news, it's coming from so many different places, and it's pretty clear that there are different viewpoints and biases at play. How do we make sense of all this and stay truly informed?
That's a vital skill these days. We're flooded with information from every direction, and it's tough to sort through it all. The key is to develop some strong media literacy skills.
Okay, so what can our listeners do, practically speaking, to get better at navigating the media? How can we make sure we're getting a balanced, accurate view of the news?
One of the most important things, diversify your news sources. Don't rely on just one place or one perspective. Look for information from a variety of sources, including those that might challenge your own views.
Right, it's easy to fall into that echo chamber where you're only hearing the things you already agree with.
Exactly. And pay attention to the language. Are certain words being used to make you feel a certain way or to frame the story in a particular light? Be critical of headlines, think about where the information is coming from, and don't be afraid to double-check things yourself. There's so much misinformation out there that it's essential to verify what you're reading or hearing.
It's almost like being a detective, right? You got to look for clues, figure out the bigger picture, and not just believe everything you see.
You got it. And remember, being an informed citizen is something you have to work at. It takes effort, critical thinking, and a willingness to engage with different perspectives.
Well said. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, from President Trump's joint address and all the reactions to it, to the problems at the FBI, and this big push to expand immigration enforcement. It's a lot to process, and I'm sure our listeners have their own thoughts and questions.
I'd love to hear what's on your mind, listener. What stuck with you from all this? What worries you the most? What questions do you have?
Yeah, like we always say, the best deep dives are the ones that leave you with more questions than answers. So keep thinking, keep asking those questions, and keep digging deeper into these important issues.
That's so true, The more you learn, the more you realize just how much more there is to learn. It's what keeps these deep dives interesting, I think.
I agree, for sure. But it's important to remember that these aren't just stories we're talking about. They affect real people's lives.
You're right. It can be easy to get lost in all the national headlines and forget that these things, they have very real consequences for folks at the local level.
Exactly. So, you know what? I think it'd be great if our listeners took a minute to think about how all this connects to their own experiences. Are you seeing these policies and political shifts playing out in your community? Are there local groups working on these issues that you could support or even join?
I think that's a great idea. Sometimes the best way to understand these big, complicated issues is to look at how they're happening right in our own backyard. Talk to your neighbors, get involved with local stuff, and be a force for good in your community.
Remember, change starts small. Your voice matters, what you do matters, and you have the power to make a difference. So don't just watch all this happen, get out there and do something.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We've tackled some tough topics today, and we hope this conversation has given you something to think about.
We hope you've learned something new, maybe seen things from a different perspective, and we encourage you to keep exploring these issues.
Thanks for joining us on this journey, exploring the big news stories of the day. Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged. We'll see you next time.